This video is only covering one tool, the gradient tool. The gradient tool gives you exactly what is called a gradient. A gradient is a series of colors that fills like the bucket tool, but in multiple colors. This is also where you're going to really start to need to play around with your tool, your best friend, your tool options bar up here at the top. So I'm going to start to explain from left to right. The very first window is your thumbnail view that shows you what your gradient is. If you hit the down arrow, you will see that there are several different other gradient choices. Let me take a moment to explain some of the gradients that you see that have the check boxes. If you see the flyout as the software is talking to you, this is where it is telling you that it is going to something that is transparent. Art software needs to tell you at different points when there is things that are something or nothing. A lot of times we assume the color white means nothing is there. However, in art software, white is a something. But if there is nothing there, the transparent background is shown as these different checkboxes. So, if I were to use this gradient of this spectrum, you will see that there is transparent on either side. So as I go to incorporate the gradient, it will only give me the gradient. It isn't filling everything. However, if you notice to the left, there is another gradient that looks very similar. However, it has red on either side. When I go to use this gradient, the entire image is flood filled with the gradient. I'm going to skip over edit. I'll go back to it. There are 5 different styles of gradient. There is linear, and to activate a gradient you have to click and drag, and you will notice that I have a line on there. There's a little plus sign, and it is where the start and stop of the gradient begin. So if I drag going up, the yellow will be on the bottom. If I go from right to left, it will flood fill vertically. If I want the entire background to be filled, I would go from one side to the other, and you can see that it expands the gradient. The second one, as it is radial gradient, and that's what I was using before. The third one is a angular, so it will fill, clockwise fill around the edges. The next one is reflective, so as you click and drag, it will repeat on the other side of your start. Then the fifth one is just like the radial, it is diamond, so it will fill more like diamond shaped, obviously, as it's called. Again, mode, we don't change mode, we leave that. Opacity. If you did something interesting where you made one and then you dropped your opacity, and as you can notice by the thumbnail, you kind of start to see the check boxes, you can create a second gradient on top of the first gradient, and as you continue to fill, because the opacity, every time you fill over one opacity, it will basically increase the opacity until you can't see it. So that is the different styles and opacity of the gradients. However, I'm going to bring my opacity all the way back up. There are other choices for gradients. If you notice, there are double arrows. Arrows always mean more. And as you notice at the bottom, there are other categories of different gradients that you can choose from that are preset in here. So you can play around with those. Now, gradients, you need to be careful. Gradients can be too much, so you want to use them sparingly. I'm going to bring myself back to my default ones by clicking and choosing the default, and I am going to choose a 3-part gradient. You can create your own gradients with the edit button. Don't choose more than a 3-part gradient, because once you create a gradient, you end up creating 2 blend sections, which will essentially give you 5 more colors with a 3-part gradient. If you have 2, you'll have a third in the center, and so forth. Too many colors is too much. People have a tendency to look away when you are not filling with a set of colors that is recognizable. The spectrum is a recognizable set of colors that is understandable. However, you need to be careful. On the bottom, there are these tiny little things that look like houses. These are actually called stops. When you click on the stop, right here, you can click and change to another color. So I am going to create more of a sunset series of colors. Click OK. And then I am going to change to my radial. And I am going to start from the top and go to the bottom to create. You can see that I kind of got a sunset going on there. Now it has, that is the gradient tool. You can take a few minutes to play around and make a gradient of your own. It is very useful in creating backgrounds, but as I said before, it can be very distracting, so be careful with using too much for a gradient. Good luck.